Hello, good morning again, everybody. Welcome back to the Sandbox stage. My name is Beau Woods. I will be your MC for the day, or for at least the morning part of the day. We've got a really exciting panel coming up. But first, if you haven't already gotten your socks, make sure you fill out the survey, get your socks. I've got a pair of them somewhere here on me. There you go, in the back row. He's got his socks. Have you got your socks? Some people do. All right. Well, this next panel is about, we sometimes talk about building the plane as we fly it. Well, this is building a bug bounty program, a coordinated vulnerability disclosure program, as we're flying the plane. Not literally, the pilots aren't involved in this, but there's some really smart people at the airlines that are doing it. So I want to bring up our three speakers. First, we have founder of Silver Key Strategies, Elizabeth Wharton. Elizabeth, come on up. Next, we have founder, chairman, and CTO of BugCrowd, Casey Ellis. Casey. And finally, we have the senior manager of cyber defense for Air Canada, Richard Szymborski. Richard. All right, Elizabeth, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. There we go. Trying to figure out to make sure the mic's going. And I bet y'all didn't know, and just for fun, the TSA, almost on a daily basis, stops someone from trying to sneak snakes onto airplanes at US airports, including a gentleman, and this is where we sigh and go, oh, Florida. But a gentleman was stopped within the last 2 weeks with a package of snakes that they were trying to get on a plane. So, all right, we've got the TSA defending against snakes, but even more dangerous than snakes are bugs. Bugs on a plane, and I don't mean the literal creepy crawlers, but what happens when we're talking about the actual software vulnerabilities, the breaches, the ransomware attacks that you see, and let us all kind of pause and think fondly back to poor Southwest Airlines during the holiday season of 2022, where over 16,000 passengers' flights got delayed because of issues with their software being antiquated. So, wow, that's a lot. We're talking almost $800 million worth of losses for an airline. So I'm picking on Southwest, but it happens across the board because you think of this giant landscape of IT and OT. So you've got not just the aircraft that we have to defend from the bugs, but when anyone who flew here, when you went online to book your ticket, you probably used the airline's app. Hopefully you did. Go to the website. They'll have better prices. You have probably entered in all kinds of personal information relating to, well, your passenger, your flight information, because it makes for a smoother flight, right? Checking in. That's an app that is now having to protect your information. That's a database that's having to protect your information. When you checked in for your bags, but most folks don't know there is one software company that provides the load balancing software for most of the major airlines. So if they have a software glitch, which has happened, unfortunately, numerous times, it grounds all the flights. So as an airline, how do you get that? And by the way, we're not even on the plane yet in this journey, if you're thinking about it. So you have to defend it against all of that before you even get to the aircraft. So what better way to talk about navigating those challenges? Because bug bounty programs, especially in the last decade, have really exploded as a way to a force multiplier. It allows companies and researchers to work together to solve for some of these challenges. But in the case of certain industries, including and especially aviation and airlines, how do you solve for these challenges when you've got to deal with all the regulatory authorities, all the different pieces? And so what better way to talk about this than to bring on a former airport attorney, the founder of and chief strategy officer for BugCrowd, and the head of the cyber operations management team for a major airline. And just for an added degree of difficulty, we didn't want to necessarily bring an American airline. Let's bring on Air Canada, because not only have they built a successful program, they've had to navigate that extra level of difficulty of working with the Canadian transportation authorities, in addition to the FAA, in addition to ICAO. So, I don't know. I mean, Richard, you have had quite an adventure. And before we get into the negative or the difficulties that you may have experienced, how's it going today?
Great. Hi, nice to meet you guys. I was pleasantly surprised to see all of you here. Wasn't sure if you guys were going to be coming here, going to see Ted Lasso, but I'm glad to see you guys here. The current state here at Air Canada, I reached out to the senior management. I went to the executive vice president, Mark Nasser, and I asked him, I said, what do you think of the bug bounty program? It's been running now for 8 months. The VDP program has been running for almost 2 years now. And basically, he supports it. And basically, he believes in this universal truth. Regardless of the subject, if you have passionate people, deeply passionate people, it'll be either very hugely positive or hugely negative, you know? And to the extent where a corporation, a leader, a manager can provide that outlet to engender that passion, it'll get harnessed and become a positive. Otherwise, it might get misdirected and become a negative. So he's very happy with it. Within the cyber community and within the hackers community, there are deeply passionate people. Yep. They're going to poke, prod, do whatever, regardless of what you tell them to do. So he's very happy. I also reached out to the CIO, Mel Crocker, and asked him the same question, about the bug bounty program. His answer was a lot shorter. He says, we should have done it earlier. It took us almost 5 years to get it there. So part of the talk, we'll talk about our experience and the lessons learned to help facilitate that journey for you guys.
No, that's great. I mean, because it's not like y'all are defending life and death. Oh, wait, you kind of are.
Just little things, right?
Yeah, just a little bit. And so before we dive too deep into the journey and the conversations, and particularly some of the challenges and how, takeaways that you can use in building a program, Casey, let's level set.
What are we talking about here?
Yeah, exactly. Are we using the same? Because we've used bug bounty or vulnerability disclosure program. Those are two separate things.
Yeah, for sure. And thank you. Good morning. Pleasure to be up here and a pleasure to be talking with Liz, who I've worked with for a long time on the whole idea of just normalizing this idea of hackers as a force for good on the internet. And obviously, Richard is someone that we've been partnered with now since 2022, I believe.
Yes. Yeah. July 15th.
There you go. There you go. So really what we're talking about is the idea that cybersecurity is inherently a human problem. When you think about what we're up against and what we're trying to defend against, it's creative adversaries. And as we're trying to build out our ability to continuously outsmart the force that kind of brings us all here in the first place, there's this incredible community of hackers that operate in good faith that really, until recently haven't been invited to the table to contribute to being part of the solution. So that's why we started BugCrowd. We didn't invent VDP or bug bounty, that was prior art, but we did pioneer the idea of putting basically a platform in between all the creativity that exists out there in the community and all the problems that folks like Richard need to solve. So specifically to your question, a VDP is basically neighborhood watch for the internet. It kind of acknowledges the fact, I loved how you put it before, there's all of this, vulnerabilities exist whether you like it or not, and it's an issue of kind of probability. Humans write software, humans deploy software, humans are great, but we're not perfect. Therefore, sometimes there's going to be mistakes that need to be found. And that's an issue of physics. What's also an issue of physics is if that's publicly exposed, someone's going to find it at some point. And the way that you were talking about it before, I love that, because you can either get the report or not, basically. You can choose to actually listen to that, or you can kind of ignore it and look in the other direction. So putting a policy up on the internet to say that, yeah, here's how you tell us this information, and by the way, if you come to us, presenting as a hacker, we're going to assume that you're operating in good faith. You don't need to worry about your door getting kicked in, because that's been a problem for a long time. The policy, the intake method, so whatever it is that you have that allows researchers to get information to you, and then obviously the process that you've got downstream to actually handle that information, that's together a VDP. If you add a reward to that, that becomes a bug bounty. So the idea of vulnerability disclosure programs is for it to be passive. It's just kind of acknowledgement of how things work, and you're trying to align with that. If you want to actually actively incentivize that and start to drive people towards specific outcomes that you want, or really ultimately extend your security team with the folk to get involved and show a passion for breaking into the thing that you're trying to protect, that's when you add rewards, and that's a bug bounty program.
So it's an evolution, and not only with programs like what Richard and Air Canada have set up, but what are some of the other industries that you've seen? Because again, that IT-OT balance and those challenges, I mean, it's easy to shots fired, like, hey, you've got a problem. What are some of the other industries that are finding success in answering this way?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, obviously I'm not from around here originally. I started the company in Sydney, Australia, and pretty much moved out to Silicon Valley as soon as it showed proof of life, because at that point in time, it's like this crazy idea is either going to catch on fire and fail, or move really quickly. If we wanted to move fast, here's probably the right place to be. So that's kind of where it started. I think the idea of taking advantage of this phenomena of security research and the potential and the power of relationships with the hacker community, that really did start in the tech industry. But what we saw pretty quickly, it was partly based on the fact that we've got a shared problem regardless of our industry, that I kind of laid out before. Lots of bad guys, lots of creativity, lots of reasons to do bad things, and we're trying to outsmart them with automation and people being paid by the hour. It doesn't matter how smart they are, they're going to fail at some point because of the math, right? So how do you kind of level that out? That resonated really broadly very quickly. So financial services, we've been working with the Pentagon since 2015 in all sorts of different domains, most recently actually securing AI, because the crowd can do that, right? From an OT standpoint, medical device security was something that really kicked off pretty aggressively around 2016. It's interesting because it's not just a crazy tech company thing to do. We have seen more traditionally conservative organizations, and especially folks like Air Canada that have a safety critical component to what they're doing. They've lent into this idea because ultimately they kind of need to. And recognizing that and starting to partner with the hacker community is, I think between now and the heat death of the universe, everyone's going to be doing that. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing at this point.
Yeah, and so as both automotive, the medical device, and airline, and a lot of that focus, I mean, Boeing has certainly brought some of the physical safety issues to the forefront, but building that and coming in to a company and saying, hey, I have this idea, I think we should, we've got the people who are doing this research, we've got our team, they're swamped, they're doing all this. I know we should invite the researchers into our environment. And so, Richard, tell us how that conversation went.
So I got introduced to the bug bounty program about 7 years ago when I joined Air Canada. And I remember vividly, we had this tech plan out there. We had the big firm, accounting firm, come in, and they built this roadmap for us. And on it, you saw the typical stuff, endpoint, the proxy, and stuff like that. But the one thing that stood out was the bug bounty program. I saw that, I go, wow, that's cool, because I didn't really know much about the bug bounty program. So I saw that. But at the time, like 7 years ago, cyber wasn't what cyber is right now. Within Air Canada, we were about 7 people, completely of having cyber. So we had this tech plan, and months would pass by, and it kind of moved. Instead of doing it next year, it moved it to the following year, and it just kept moving. So one of the things that we learned was someone had to take ownership of that. So that was one of the things that if you guys want to do a bug bounty program, take control of it. So that's one thing that caused us a delay. So we lost a couple of years doing that. Then once we took the ownership and we went through the process, we had to go through procurement, right? We had to go through legal, we had to go through finance and all that. And the biggest hurdle we had was with legal. And it was just a culture shock because who are these security researchers? You know what I mean? Like, why do we want to do that? So
You want hackers on our plane?
No, it's always blame the lawyers because we do suck the fun out of most things.
it is. But they have a role to play. So when they looked at the contracts and stuff like that, they came up with, I'd say, 3 risks. The first risk that was, that we had to look at was like Bugcrowd. Replace Bugcrowd with any company. Do not consider the security researchers as a subcontractor. So therefore, we have no contract with the subcontractor. So we have no recourse for any damages if something happens. If a researcher takes down our site by accident, or finds a vulnerability and sells it on the dark web, or finds some PI information and sells that. So that was a risk that was flagged. So the only thing we really have is a program brief that we have between the researcher and ourselves to tell them what the rules are and stuff like that, but it's not a contract that we can reuse for damages.
Well, and I imagine that worked really well because when you're looking at researchers that are doing some of this, you've got to be able to navigate ones who have resources. In other words, have an attorney that can negotiate on the other side, knows what they're signing. Or a lot of times it's individuals who maybe became annoyed with something or something sparked their attention, they fell or they saw the program, and it's almost a project. So that's great that y'all could come up with a way to navigate how do we address both of those audiences?
Yeah, so that was a challenge. That took a while to get aboard. The other one was when a security researcher finds a vulnerability and it gets communicated to us through Bugcrowd, that information is not considered privileged. So what does that mean? So if there's a claim against Air Canada that this vulnerability wasn't properly mitigated, well, that's going to come out in discovery, and they're going to see that and say, hey, you guys knew about this vulnerability, and you didn't patch it in time. So there's a risk for us there. So when we looked at that with legal and the conversations we had with the CISO and all that, basically we said, look, the folks that you participate in the bug bounty program, they're the white hats. They're ethical hackers. They're doing this for a living, so they don't want to endanger that for them. They're living. So, we have the ethical hackers there. And the other one for the other issue we had was the limited liability. Within Air Canada, we have a policy to be X amount of X factor for liability. It just didn't meet that threshold. But because we have no contract with the security researcher, we don't have any liability there. And we don't think we'll have much liability with the vendor, with Bugcrowd. So we accepted that risk.
We work hard on that. So.
Yeah. So, for that, so those are the main issues that we had. But the challenge is to change that culture within the corporates to say, hey, we want to do this. We have faith in the security researchers to do their work. And at the end, we found that there was additional value over the risk that we have.
So if you don't mind,
No.
with that, between the contractual, the transactional specifics, some of those kind of details, and just this general idea of okay, you're asking us as an organization to admit the fact we have vulnerabilities in the first place publicly, as well as invite this community that we've traditionally not trusted and as lawyers have spent a lot of time trying to keep out. Mm-hmm. You're asking us to basically do a full 180 on that and invite them in. Which of the two was more difficult?
Yeah. It was to invite them in, honestly, to convince the folks to say, guys, we have ethical hackers. It's happening now, whether we go into a bug bounty program or a VDP program, there are hackers out there knocking on your door trying to get in and expose it. Why not understand that, leverage that, get the information, and grow from it? So when we did the bug bounty program, so now the VDP program, it's going to be close to 2 years that we have it. We found 4 critical vulnerabilities. The bug bounty program, we introduced it in September of 2023, and it's about 8 months that we have it. And we found that we got reported over 13 critical. We have other medium and low vulnerabilities also, 13 critical. And the one that kind of was a shock for us was they identified a vulnerability where a person can travel basically for free. So they can just fly, get on a plane, and go anywhere. So
And you're saying for the record that's been patched?
it's been
and
patched.
fixed.
It's been patched. And when we did the vulnerability disclosure, we started with the VDP program because the culture, we didn't want to start paying out bounties. We didn't know how much bounties we're going to pay and all that. So we said, look, let's start with the VDP program. So we did that. And some of the challenges that we had was the team that was managing the vulnerability disclosure program was the blue team. So it was the vulnerability management team that I built that was managing it. They didn't have the technical background like the red team. So fortunately at Air Canada, we do have a red team. So we built basically a purple team. They helped us out, and they were helping the blue team understand how to triage those things, those incidences. Because the way it works is a security researcher announces a vulnerability. It gets triaged by BugCrowd to say, yeah, this is a critical vulnerability, or no, it's a medium and all that. They do the triage, then our team takes a look at it, and then we evaluate it and say, oh, I don't think this is a critical. Oh, yeah, this is a critical. So that triaging internally took time to build. So luckily, like I said, we had a red team. So, lessons learned there. If you guys are how many people are considering a bug bounty program? Raise your hands up.
Or just crowdsourcing in general.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a few of you out there. So, one of the recommendations is to have that red team folks there with you so that they can help you. Because the blue team, they don't know how to use a burp suite or what the cross-site scripting is and all that. It's a different language. So you need to have someone to help the blue team help triage that.
I mean, it sounds like y'all really built on that communication, like getting out of the silos within the company. Did that come natural, or how difficult was it to start those conversations of getting kind of legal to see the importance of this, but between the different teams internally saying, hey, we're going to do this, you're about to get your world rocked with or how do we, so how can people start those conversations easier?
Yeah, so legal for sure, that's a challenge that you guys need to do. We were lucky, we went out with the Aviation ISAC, we have a community. We reached out to other airlines. We went to Alaskan Air, we went to United, asked them about their bug bounty programs, and they gave us all the pluses and some of the minuses, but mostly everyone was in favor of the bug bounty program. Once we passed the legal hurdle and got the contract signed, the work to get it into production took us, I'd say, a month to go live. Honestly, because there's several ways of implementing the VDP or the bug bounty program. You can leverage the BugCrowd's infrastructure, which we did. So basically, you just spin up a page and put an iframe in there, and you're on their system. That literally took, easy to get up there. The only pet peeve I have with BugCrowd on the iframe, there's only one language. You can only put it in English. You can't put it in multiple languages. And in Montreal, there's the French and English. So that's a little pet peeve. So hopefully you guys will get that one resolved.
That is in the pipeline somewhere.
Perfect, perfect. We set up the iframe. We dealt with branding. So we had to talk to the branding team to put the scope of the VDP program. So the VDP program, it's just people, putting out the disclosure. So our scope was broad. It was aircanada.com and our mobile apps. So we had to put that on the webpage. Branding team did that within days, and we got the site up and running. So actually setting it up, that was easy. And the buy-in from the other teams, from the IT teams, from the other cyber teams, they wanted this years ago. So they were happy to get it done, you know what I mean? So that wasn't a problem. And then, the challenge was, okay, if I find something, I have to go report it to the dev team, you know what I mean? So you don't say, hey, you screwed up here. So we had that already relationship because of the VM program. We dealt with our developers. So have that relationship with the dev team and also with the QA team. Because when we get a vulnerability that we need to validate and triage it, we need to understand how to do that. Who better than the QA team? The QA team knows all the structure, what to get done. As an example, we use the booking flow. So how do you validate that? How do you cancel the transaction afterwards so that we get the money back, right, during the testing period? So we had to build those relationships, but we were fortunate that we already had those relationships with the QA team and the dev team. But to get it up on the VDP, it went very, very, very quickly.
So if I could jump in off the back of that, that's I mean, Air Canada's version of this, as you would imagine, having now done this for 11 years, like we've seen all sorts of different versions of that journey. And that's a very typical one. But some of the other approaches that are available for getting started, and this is, I don't see why you wouldn't work with anyone but Bugcrowd, but you can do it on your own, and there are other vendors, so trying to make this a vendor agnostic talk in that sense. A big part of what we do is make sure, probably about 70% at this point in time of the programs that we have on the platform, the overall throughput is actually private programs. So like in this room, when we say VDP and Bug Bounty, the immediate assumption most people have is that that's open internet, like everyone comes in, everyone participates. That's mostly because it's noisy, it's inherently viral. The private stuff we don't talk about, it isn't kind of public in that way, right? So, I wanted to call that out because that's a thing that is an application and a way to basically consume the crowd that most folk aren't necessarily aware of. And the reason I call it out is that that's actually a really good way to start. Getting to that, we call it like mean time to oh crap moment. Like the shorter you can make that and the quicker you can actually demonstrate the fact that, there is things that are missing. Yes, the crowd is available and here to help. Yes, your hair's not going to catch on fire because they are good people, not bad people. There's tremendous value in doing this, like the better. And ultimately it's a matter of decreasing the friction around that.
Yeah.
Something that we often see is companies start with like private programs that are inherently a lot more controlled. And that's their kind of crawl, walk, run approach to kind of expanding the program and growing it out over time.
Yeah, just to add to that, so that's what we did, right? So we did the VDP program.
Yeah.
That was general, open to everyone. The problem with that is it's not publicized anywhere, right? So if you don't know about it, what do you do? How do you get people to come to your website? So we did a couple of things. We did a health check. So there's what we call the well-known files. So the well-known file, security.txt, basically puts all the contact information of a VDP program. So all the researchers, they just scan your web pages, get the well-known files, so they know who to reach to. So that's one way we do that. So we did that. The other thing that we did is we went out to DEF CON. We went out and gave out, we had swags made. We had the luggage tags with our vanity URL, so vdp.aircanada.com if you want to go there. We gave that out at DEF CON. We went to B-Sides in Calgary, and we also gave out points, Aeroplan points, to some of the researchers. So in a VDP program, we had one researcher that found 2 critical vulnerabilities for us, so we gave him Aeroplan points. Now we switched over to a bug bounty program, September 22nd, so only about 8 months ago. And the difference between the two, one was the scope. So whenever you start a bug bounty program, don't say it for your complete site because you're going to get inundated with stuff. So start with something small. So we were comfortable starting with our payment process because that flow, we had the Big Four come in and do pen tests, and we said, hey, this is great. They shouldn't be able to find anything because we thought that was the most secure.
Say, of course. I mean, y'all pay big money to the pen testers.
That's right.
And get those reports.
That's right.
Whoops.
Yeah, I was gonna say, how big of a shock was it the first time stuff started coming in?
It was crazy. Like within days, like a couple of days, I told you about the flying for free. That came up right away, and we're like, what? This was our secure flow. Like this is like our payment process. We shouldn't have any issues with this one, and that came up right away.
Yeah, I'm chuckling quietly here because seeing what we see, we call that Tuesday. Basically, like that's like literally what happens. There's assurance debt that every organization has because they've, regardless of what they've done, some companies haven't done a whole lot from an assurance standpoint, others have done tons. And the reality is that the firepower that they've got available to discover, what's there to be fixed is just not the same as what you get when you basically just truly emulate the adversary. So this idea of the assurance debt being cleared, that's a very common phenomenon, and it's a common reaction to it. It's the oh crap moment that I was talking about before.
And we were kind of lucky. This was a lucky one because we had interns. We brought in interns, so we have an internship program, so we bring a few folks. And I had a couple that came in, and I put them on the VM program. And when we turned on the bug bounty program, it was just inundated. So at least I had bodies to help with the triage. So in the beginning, we had a couple of issues. Well, not issues. Learning curve, I guess.
Happy accidents.
Caveats to it. The triaging initially took a bit longer than expected. Instead of a couple of days, it took like a week to get some triage stuff done. So,
Which I was gonna say isn't bad considering, like, you think of like the turnaround time for updates and different stuff on our devices, and y'all are having to work across updating multiple platforms.
Yep.
So kudos to the interns. For
Plus, you're learning how to listen to the entire internet and
Yeah.
asking if there's a thing that's broken. And like the internet, just in general, has a tendency to
yeah.
say yes to questions like that. So the muscle group within an organization, Bugcrowd, what we've done is we've built out a lot within the platform from a triage engineering standpoint to reduce the friction as much as we possibly can with that problem. And then we've got a huge team that actually supports and sits there in the middle as well. But the reality is that even with that, every organization is going to have to go through that process of figuring out how to ingest that information, how to like prioritize it. That's unique to pretty much every company in its own way. So that learning process is a really important one to kind of factor into this, I think.
And to the private program, so we did the private program, and we reached out to Bugcrowd. They identified researchers that are specialized in the aerospace. So I think we opened up with like 100 researchers.
Yep.
Of that, 10, 20% really get on board, and they started finding this stuff. So kudos with that. They came on. We saw the vulnerabilities right away. We took them, brought them straight to the dev team. They look at that, they go, no, that's not possible. What do you mean? And then they saw that, and they right away, they took it, they prioritized it, and they put it into the pipeline to get fixed. So within a couple of weeks, one of those critical vulnerabilities got addressed. There was some repeats. So, they identified a critical vulnerability. We give it to our dev team. They say they fixed it. So we say, great. We close that vulnerability, and then, a similar one comes up because they added a slash or something, right? So the actual mitigation wasn't done properly. So sometimes you're gonna have to pay a researcher a couple of times because it's not their fault that we didn't fix it properly. You know what I mean? They brought one vulnerability and then it wasn't mitigated properly. So we had a couple of those, but then there was a couple that we know what the flavor was. So then we took that out of scope. So we modified the scope within the vdp.aircanada.com and removed that. Say, guys, we're no longer going to be handling this one. We know about it, and it's going to take us a little bit of time to mitigate it. So then we fixed that. The researchers aren't too happy about that when that happens, but they understand.
Yeah.
And one of the things, I don't know if anyone else in the gaming community, racing community, has watched the film Gran Turismo and the story of taking people who have perhaps a different spin, a different perspective on a skill set, gaming, and becoming a champion race car driver in the real world. So how do you identify those skill sets? Because you're saying, you're working within the company with interns and the red team, blue team to create those conversations. And I imagine some of it is, keep going back to legal because, well, I'm biased, but even working within the communications team to say, hey, we've got to pivot. What super skills do you have? How can we train? How does that go? And how heavily did you lean kind of on each other to figure out who could race better? How heavily did you lean on vendors like Bugcrowd or other providers?
Yeah, I can speak just at the beginning. Like, I knew nothing about Bugcrowd program, but we had a deeply passionate person on the red team, and he knew about Bugcrowd. He knew about the bounty program, and he's the one that started the transition within the corporation to say, hey, we got to do this. So luckily we had one of those folks, Kyle Howson. I'm sure a few folks know him, and he was able to help us out with that.
Yeah.
And the researchers, Bugcrowd gets all the researchers. So
yeah, and on that side internally, like we often see that there's a technical champion who just gets it, and ultimately what ends up happening a lot of the times, they become almost like a lightning rod for other people that have interest. Because ultimately, one of the things that I love about the opportunity that doing this creates is this kind of idea of security champions within your organization, right? You're not necessarily hiring people directly into the process, but what you're doing is, kind of identifying curiosity in adjacent teams, and it's folks that don't necessarily have a security title, but they love this stuff, and they're kind of leaning in, they're curious, they can take what we're trying to tell them from a security standpoint and contextualize it in what they do for a job. the more opportunities you have to actually take advantage of that, I think the better. And this is a really good way to have ammunition for that conversation, to actually generate that curiosity. But yeah, on the researcher side, I mean, from a technology standpoint, pretty much what we've built is like a dating website for people that break computers. is kind of how I frame it. And it's literally like it's a fun way of explaining it because people laugh, but it's actually pretty accurate as well. In terms of how we look at the research community that we've got available, we're looking for traits. Like what are your skills? To what degree can we trust you, and what evidence do we have for that? What's your offensive security history? All those different things. And then on the customer side, what we do is we look at what the objectives are, what the tech stack looks like, what the the different things that are traits on really both sides. The matching piece of it that we do does work a lot like a dating website algorithm, in the sense that, like, based on historical probability, if you add this and this, you get success. So, like, let's figure out how to continue to do that. So that's like the tech level. I think at the human level, it's all about adjacencies. The thing that's been really interesting with aviation security is that we've seen a lot of people come into this space from automotive security, because it's a similar set of technologies. Like, one flies and the other one doesn't, obviously. But when you think about airframe communication systems, CAN bus, the relationship between kind of almost like OT and ICS type systems that exist on a plane, and then the internet.
Yeah.
There's this spectrum of tech that if you've hacked a car, you intuitively understand that. So.
I was gonna say, but how many times when y'all are working with different industries and shifting some of it from, for example, the automotive to the aviation, have you used the line where we're testing, we don't need roads? Oh, come on,
Not yet,
wasn't
but
that bad?
that's a good idea. I like that. That's t-shirt worthy at some point.
Hey, there you go. But I mean, and it sounds like that's been one of the benefits as these programs have evolved, both with the companies, but also with vendors, and kind of the benefit to, and not necessarily going with the vendor, but the community is you're learning and building the next evolution. So it's that realizing, hey, maybe we find some of the researchers who are active in this area, and we add them into the dating, website. And it, from a company perspective of, how do we find the people that are more attuned to where, and so, because you're always going to get, it seems like, the folks who are researchers who are interested in going, I'm hacking, I might as well get some money for it, okay. And then, but some who have that expertise to know which systems to hit first.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting for us because, like, we weren't talking about aviation security when we first started the company, right? The design and the picture that I had of where this industry would go is kind of how I laid it out at the start. It's not about bug bounty or VDP necessarily, nor is it about planes or IoT or whatever else. It's about all of it. It's about, how do you, like, scalably engineer human creativity into whatever problem we're dealing with as an industry at the time. And over the last 10 years, we've seen a lot of new things pop up. Like, we didn't have an IoT security problem in 2012 when I started the company, and then we suddenly did.
Yeah.
So, the whole thing is like, okay, where is the solution for that going to come from? Where are the people that can do this? For us, it's really a question of, like, how do we cold start that crowd if we need to, if it's a net new skill set, which it very rarely is. There's usually some sort of pocket of knowledge that we can identify and kind of use as the bootstrap for the whole thing. And then from there, we just pretty much encourage what the hacker community already does, which is share and collaborate and kind of rally around common points of interest. It's just a matter of lather, rinse, repeat on that. So, like, this is no exception to that.
Yeah, for us, the next step is to work with our partners, right?
Yeah.
To get that bug bounty program out there with them. Like, it's tough with the OEMs, with the Boeings and the Airbus, because that's, they don't want us to touch that, right? We can do a pen test.
Which is not unique to aviation.
That's right. So we can do a pen test, and they see the results and all that. But there's a whole bunch of other partners that we deal with on the aircraft. So we need to work with them to say, hey guys, we have lots of success with the bug bounty program. Can we work together to see what we can do on the aircraft? So, like we say, crawl, walk, run. We're not there yet with the third parties, but we're open to that, and we're trying to get that partnership with them to start having those discussions.
Now, are you finding more receptive responses from, and I talked about ICAO and FAA and like where you've got regulators that are overseeing saying, hey, we need to change the software, we need to change it quickly. Are you able to leverage more now that you're seeing that success to say, hey, does that even help when you're working with the OEMs?
I can't speak much on that side. I know that the communities that we are with, like the Aviation ISAC, we have the discussions with that, and all of us want that. So we want to get to that next step, but how far we are, I think we're still at early stages for that.
Yeah, what I would say to that is that there is a general trend from a regulatory and a policy standpoint to acknowledge the fact that shit happens on the internet and you should be able to hear that. So the idea of VDP is a mandated thing, that's a steady trend in terms of the progress of that across the industry. And I think ultimately what it comes down to is that like transparency is anti-fragile. The quicker you can recognize that and actually start to work with that instead of fighting it, the better. There's a lot of conversations happening at the policy level that are acknowledging that and starting to actually force it top down. So we've seen it in healthcare, like with the FDA post-market cybersecurity guidance in like 2015, and then the pre-market in 2018, acknowledging the fact that vulns happen, and the security research community are going to find them. So as a vendor, as a manufacturer, as a product that has a safety consequence on your user, you should be able to receive those. That's a thing that you just must do because it's physics. It just makes sense, right? Same sort of thing. I'm actually doing a panel shortly on election security. Same thing kind of happened there, and that was less of a mandate and more of a recommendation. But in that case, a big part of what drove that was the idea that transparency is actually a thing that can create confidence and trust in the market as well, which elections need. So yeah, I think that trend, we haven't seen that happen with the FAA from a regulatory standpoint with aviation, but I think as a general trend, things are moving in that direction. So I wouldn't be surprised if we saw that at some point in the future.
Well, I was gonna say, and so for the folks who are listening, participating, that are contemplating, how do I do this and introduce this into my own company? Like, what are some of the wins, Richard, like the victory laps that y'all have taken, and where do you see the next steps?
For us, it was really to just take that ownership. We had too many delays to get it on board, but once we got it, everybody wanted it. Everybody sees the benefit of it. So for the folks that want to implement the bug bounty program, for us, like all the programs that I've implemented, this was the easiest one because I don't have to build an infrastructure. I got to build a web page and just host on someone else's infrastructure, and have those relationships right with your QA team and your dev team. For us going forward, we've opened the scope now in the bug bounty program. We've added other URLs. We've added our loyalty program, and for us, build that outlet. You know what I mean? The art of the possible, right? So you guys, it's out there. Gamify it, have some rules, and just give some prizes, right? Some money out there, and it just catches on. Like it's been spreading now. Now that we have this purple team, they're just growing, and we just recently updated our VDP program to VDP Pro. So the difference with that is now that VDP program is publicized on the Bug Bounty Bugcrowd platform, so more people can see it, and then they can start participating.
Yeah, and thank you for the plug there, by the way. What I would add to that is that I think the idea, there's not a lot that we do in cybersecurity that we can explain to the general internet using layperson that they'll understand, right? So you go through like, let's talk about SIM or EDR or XDR or whatever DR we're up to at this point. All those different things. It confuses the general user. They understand that cybersecurity and the role of computers in their safety and their kind of personal life, there's a risk there of some sort, and that they should be like vaguely concerned about that, but they have no idea what's actually going on, for the better part, right? The thing that's nice about this model is that Neighborhood Watch for the internet is a concept that pretty much everyone can understand. So what I've seen as a win, just in general, across the board, regardless of whether or not you're a Bugcrowd customer, is organizations that have taken this and done it well, But then once they've gotten to the point of stability in their actual program, they're actually going out and saying, hey, look at what we're doing. This is a part of how we're trying to keep you safe as a customer. In this industry, obviously, that's something that people are thinking about a lot, right? I see that as a win that we've seen in a whole bunch of other industries. I think this is no exception to that. It's a general phenomena that I think is kind of unique to the idea of engaging the hacker community. I think it's a good one to actually take advantage of. And obviously we can help with that, but it's frankly a thing that's available regardless of how you do it.
Well, and considering all the pieces that airlines and aviation play in our everyday lives, so just not only the transportation of people, but the logistics side of things, the movement of goods, we all have a vested interest. And so it's great to see that collaboration growing between the research community, the airlines themselves, and kudos, Richard, to your team for being able to kind of weather the storm, so to speak, and kind of find your footing. But not only that, but contribute and grow and build better, because it's through those conversations of, that companies like BugCrowd can provide of like, hey, what did you see that worked well? What did you see that worked well? What didn't? And being able to have those conversations without the embarrassment, because I think we're moving beyond that, where it's not like, oh gosh, we had a breach or we have a vulnerability. Then it's like, yeah, we had a vulnerability, but here's how we fixed it. Maybe you guys can learn from this as well. So any last parting advice other than don't try to bring a snake on a plane and don't try to bring a bug on a plane unless it's through our disclosure program?
Yeah, like I said, get alignment from your business. Our strategic leaders see the benefit of it. They funded the continuing of the bug bounty program because they see the benefit of that. If you have it in your roadmap, take ownership of it, guys. It's going to be the easiest thing that you're going to implement. I'm telling you. It took us literally, once we did all the issues, to implement it took us less than a month to get it done. And you'll see feedback results right away.
I don't know that I could put it much better than that. Honestly, I think the one thing that I would say is going back to the VDP, bug bounty, crowdsourced security that's private, all of the different bug bashes that are in person that work on hardware. There's all sorts of different variations of how you can apply the crowd to solving security problems. Putting that aside for a second, I think in general the vulnerability disclosure side of things, where basically you're just at the very least able to receive security feedback from the internet if and when it happens. We're all going to have to deal with that at some point. And that's not, we didn't cause that problem. We kind of identified the fact that was going to happen as an issue of kind of internet physics. I think it's really important to recognize that and get ahead of it. Like, there's two ways to engage in that, and this kind of goes back to what you're saying. You can be like on the bus or like in front of it, dealing with it kind of reactively. And I think you can get much better outcomes if you're actually leaning into it and trying to actually work with this phenomena of what's happening at this point in time, instead of freaking out when someone tweets at your CEO.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, you either made your flight or you're still left standing at the gate. And no, well, thank you so much for sharing. And also thank you to the Aerospace Village, the Aerospace Sandbox, for providing ongoing discussions like this. And thanks for sharing your insights, and thanks to everyone for listening and participating.
Thank you.